Hey, I am having system crashes here and I hope it doesn't disrupt me again. Yeah, this is a nightmare. Okay, so this is about the initiatives on early warning, early action. Before we move on to the recommendations, the Secretary General's call to ensure that every person on Earth is protected by MUSE, the multi-hazard early warning systems, within 5 years will require concerted efforts of individuals, communities, institutions, organizations, academia, research institutions, governments, regional associations, and international actors. Collaborations will be necessary at every level and across all sectors. The latest science, innovations in technology, and good practices will need to be leveraged to address this grand challenge. All these actions and activities will need to be resourced appropriately in terms of people, tools, and funding, as initially set out in the EW for All Executive Action Plan. So here are the key findings and recommendations to achieve early warnings for all. This report provides an overview of the status of MUSE globally, identifying progress and prevailing gaps while acknowledging challenges and highlighting opportunities within and across each pillar of MUSE and at multiple levels. Although great progress has been made in some areas such as observations and communication infrastructure, there is much more to do, especially around dissemination and action, as evidenced by floods in Europe, where lives and livelihoods were lost despite good data and even good forecasts. So that's a good example of how the last mile gap has to be filled. Key findings, I won't read all the details. So overall good progress is being made with numerous ongoing efforts to strengthen MUSE. The EW for All initiative is catalyzing and expediting the progress. Early warning protects lives. We already saw some numbers. The glass remains half full, so you can be optimistic and say we are headed in the right direction, but we have a lot to do because the natural hazards are perking up, their risk is increasing and evolving. Compound events and multiple hazards hammering things together, the most vulnerable countries. And risk governance, a key enabler of early warning and resilience building, needs to be effective. So EWS need to be embedded, early warning systems need to be embedded in the larger risk governance approach of a country. Okay, so there are numbers there as to how many countries are on track, as we saw some maps, but still glass half empty. Limited risk knowledge hampers early warning effectiveness. So risk mapping with data monitoring and vulnerabilities, exposure hazards together is really important, because if you don't have risk knowledge, then you cannot put resources in the right place at the right time and allocate resources as well in terms of people, funding, and the tools, right? So this is very critical. Significant gaps remain in observations and forecasting. This is always tricky because there are some that are kind of a low-hanging fruit on the predictability track, and like El Nino is predictable months in advance. Monsoon does okay, but not as good as El Nino. Then you rely on El Nino impact on the monsoon and pre-monsoon heat waves, monsoon droughts, extreme events. So there is still a long way to go in terms of advancing the understanding of where prediction may come from and actually implementing them into improving forecasting. And to do actually forecasting, you will need observations in place, but gaps are there in all these steps. Okay, so improved forecast lead times are saving lives. So we are able to do now 1 day, 3 day, 10 day, and so on with some skill. Systems are easier to predict in the mid-latitudes. They are large lumbering systems, so where the forecast can sometimes go up to 10 days. In the tropics, where systems explode with convection, forecast can be much shorter time scale, so on. So there are limits to the predictability of some natural hazards. This is very important. Some hazards and their impacts will always be challenging to predict in terms of timing, such as flash floods or location. Even with the best technology, warnings of tsunamis and earthquakes are inherently short notice, and yet lives and livelihoods can be saved through preparedness and plans, as well as public outreach and education relating to the risks and immediate actions to be taken. So you can have risk maps for tsunamis and earthquakes based on geologic information and so on, and early warnings are issued for tsunamis. Obviously not every type of underwater earthquake triggers tsunamis and so on, so there are always challenges. Data sharing and cascading information. Data sharing is fundamental to the provision of effective early warnings in multi-hazard, and is regularly highlighted as a key challenge. So obviously data sharing is not easy, but it's a must for saving lives. New opportunities with new technology innovations, especially in technology, present opportunities with every pillar of Muse. Global connectivity and multiple channels. In the latest data, indicator G3, which is number of people per 100,000 that are covered by early warning information through local governments or through national dissemination mechanisms, has the highest scores and has also seen the greatest improvement in scores since reporting began in 2015. So global connectivity and multiple channel are being very helpful to dissemination and communication. Plans to act on warnings are not widespread, so again, glass half full. Planned and rehearsed responses save lives. This sounds easy, but drills in tornado warnings, even the kids know exactly what to do when the tornado warning goes off. Hide under the desk and so on and so forth. So it can make a huge difference. Foundations are being laid for multi-hazard early warning systems. We already saw maps where many countries already have Muse, and many have plans, many get help from others, and so on and so forth. So the standard operating procedures are in place in 78% of the members that are in the WMO framework. Okay, so good news. Collaboration, aligned initiatives and calls to action are needed. Obvious one, but yet needs to be stated, and pathways to make these possible are anything but trivial. I discuss many of these things in my adaptation course on how international experts can come in and help build expertise, capacity, and leaving experts and capacity behind, and not remain, people shouldn't be dependent on external experts or resources forever. Sharing good practices through guidance and communities of practice. The publication of new guidance relating to Muse ensures a shared understanding of Muse as a whole and its component parts. The mainstreaming of this knowledge underpins investment and adoption. So, mainstreaming means you put these into fiscal policies and budgeting so that funding is sustained. Training, education, expertise, last mile responses, recoveries, and dissemination, communication, observation, everything is funded in the mainstreaming process. Sustainable funding for multi-hazard early warning systems is essential. As I just said, mainstreaming. Progress on early warning for all. Foundational work to enable a full-scale implementation of the EW for All initiative has been completed. Progress has been made under each pillar collectively, including the development of roadmaps, plans, and common agendas, and the establishment of the necessary governance structure at various levels, all of which are essential to the ongoing success of the initiative. However, now is the time for implementation and action. So I will leave this here. We'll come back and look at recommendations. We are getting closer to the end, but the recommendation section is quite long. It's enormously long, so maybe we'll have 2 more podcasts and not just one. But you get the idea that global coordination under the UN agencies and the World Meteorological Organization are going well. Many countries are still lagging, but hopefully everybody will catch up. The global framework exists. The pillars of observations, networks, dissemination, communication, preparedness, and so on are all making progress, and tracking these things with metrics is always critical. So these progress reports every year help a lot in this sense, so that you identify the gaps, barriers and requirements, funding or otherwise, to make sure that progress remains steady till everyone is covered by early warnings. Okay, see you in the next topic on recommendations for early warnings for all implementation, development and implementation. Okay, see you.